Even after a semester at Palmetto State University and a couple weeks practicing on the largest XE stadium in the United States, Neil was still struck breathless by the foxhole court. He lay flat on his back on the half-court line and soaked it in. He counted rows of alternating orange and white seats until they blurred into an indistinct mess near the rafters, then studied the spring championship banners hanging in numerical order around the stadium. There was one for each of the Foxes, including the late Seth Gordon. They hadn't been there before the Foxes split up for Christmas, and Neil wondered what Allison would say when she saw them.
"You forget how to stand up, Josten?"
Neil lolled his head to one side to look at his coach. He'd left the court door open behind him, and now David Wymack stood in the doorway. Neil didn't think they'd been here long enough for Wymack to finish his paperwork. Either Wymack didn't trust Neil to keep his promise not to practice until he was fully healed, or Neil had lost track of time again. Neil hoped it was the former, but the knot in his stomach predicted otherwise. He'd agreed to spend Christmas break at Edgar Allan, but the Ravens operated on 16-hour days during their holidays. What should have been 2 weeks passed like 3, and Neil's internal clock was going haywire even after 2 days back in South Carolina. Classes were supposed to start Thursday, though, and the spring season kicked off the following week. Wymack was sure having a normal routine again would help. Neil could only hope he was right.
"It's time to go,"
Wymack said. That was enough to make Neil get up, though his battered body protested. He ignored the pain with the ease of long familiarity and resisted the urge to work at the ache in his shoulder as he crossed the court to Wymack. He didn't miss the critical once-over Wymack gave him, but chose not to acknowledge it. "They landed?" Neil asked when he was close enough.
"You'd know if you were answering your phone."
Neil pulled his phone out of his pocket and flipped it open. He pressed a couple buttons, then tilted the dark screen toward Wymack. "I must have forgotten to charge it."
"Must have,"
Wymack said, not at all fooled. He was right to be suspicious. Neil had let his phone die on purpose. Before going to bed on New Year's, he'd shut his phone off and left it unplugged. He still hadn't read the messages his teammates sent him over the break. He couldn't avoid them forever, but Neil hadn't figured out how to explain his actions.